Welcome to this morning's devotional. So this is a chance, like every morning, to take a moment to see God's perspective on the world amongst the different situations we're in, because it's pretty crazy at the moment, and we're just trying to see what God is saying through that. I'm going to be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 8. Before we do that, it will be really good to worship God, to sing a song to him, to show him what he means to us. So I believe there will be a link through which you can do that. Okay, let's read 1 Samuel chapter 8. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you that they're rejecting, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so that they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariot and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others will plough his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, "Listen to them. Give them a king." So the people wanted a king. Despite the prophetic warnings, they're actually repeated several times in the next few chapters. It's worth reading that to get that into your head, how seriously God is warning the people of God, us, about having that celebrity leadership that we're all quite keen on sometimes. And these prophecies came true. Obviously Saul was a bit of a dead duck. David, despite being after God's own heart, committed terrible sins of adultery and murder, although in many other ways he had the wonderful humility that eventually comes out in Jesus. But Solomon, I would say, is probably where it really started to show patterns that we see now in leaders around the world. So he really went for that centralized power that God was warning about. Instead of having an army based on volunteers who would be inspired to follow God and do the will of the leaders of Israel, suddenly he had an army of conscripts. And that enabled him to do more, of course. He was able to conquer way more areas of land, the largest area that Israel ever had. And as people look back to those times, of course, that's giving us a terrible problem in the Middle East right now. Solomon was also able to get huge amounts of power and the money that came with that. And he was well known as being very rich. He made some very wise decisions at times, and that's, again, trying to be the big man, as it were, in the world, in the Middle East at that time. He made some wise decisions and people looked up to him. But he also started to go down that road of consumerism, having many wives. I would say that is really where things started to go wrong when it comes to kingship, even in the nation of Israel. The point I'm trying to make here is that sometimes we, as the people of God even, make really wrong decisions. We ask for the wrong thing, and despite God warning us, and the Bible is full of warnings about all sorts of behaviours that we might choose to do, God is like the perfect parent, and he lets us do those things. He actually, in this case, tries to guide them to the right view of what a king should be, knowing that it's going to go a bit wrong. And of course, that's what's happened. Right now, leaders around the world, it's quite obvious to us through social media that they're making some really obviously bad decisions regarding racism and management of the COVID crisis. And clearly that's very upsetting for us, particularly the people of God, because we know what a true king looks like. It looks like Jesus. And Jesus' kingdom is very different. And of course, in our own individual lives and our lives as a church, we are there to show what that real kingdom looks like with all the people that we meet, the way that we act at work, and the activities that our church is doing in the places around us. Of course, we also have to pray for our leaders. And counter that, we've also got to hold them to account, to say, no, this is the standard actually that God is requiring from political leaders. And those two things, you can either go too far one direction and sort of almost adore leaders and hold them as super celebrities, or you can go down the road what maybe I do, where I get a bit too angry and want to protest, but that's also good in the right way. Clearly, protesting in large groups right now is not appropriate from health reasons, but we need to keep those two requirements that God has on us in balance, praying for and holding to account our leaders. So to end, really, let's just be encouraged that God really is in charge. He is allowing this evil to happen because he wants humanity to love him from the heart. Being omnipotent, he can bring it all to an end whenever he wants. That is not a problem, but he chooses to allow us to make mistakes sometimes so that we can learn from those and follow God closer and ultimately come into his kingdom when he does bring it to an end. Right now, there's 7-8 million people. He loves them all, and he wants them to come to faith in Jesus. So be encouraged. Amen.